Please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And if you could stay standing for a moment of silence, I just want to take a moment of silence for to recognize the passing of former Lewiston Mayor Larry Raymond. Thanks.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
I know normally during workshops we don't allow for public comment, but I was wondering if maybe we could waive that given the number of folks here pertaining to the workshop items, obviously, but.
Perfect. We will suspend the rules and allow public comment on all three of the workshop items. And so we are here for a workshop. First of all, I'll welcome you all to the city of Lewiston, the second largest city in Maine, but the city with the biggest heart. And we will start tonight with an amendment to the Master Policy 52 Solid Waste Fee Policy.
Madam Mayor, this is a fairly straightforward amendment to one of our policies. As you know, we've been talking about trying to do some work in the whole area of solid waste in terms of first educating the public about what the city's rules and regulations are, and second, taking a look at our penalties and recognizing that after the education process, we may need to utilize penalties to get compliance in some instances. What we're trying to do here is just clarify the penalty section of our policy, first off by designating certain functions that are now going to the superintendent of solid waste, to the director of planning and code, and the public works director are their designees. And that would be primarily in terms of situations where the city decides, due to unusual circumstances, that we have to take steps to remove waste from the streets or from a property, and then allowing us to bill for that. So it clarifies first who has the authority to make that decision if it needs to be removed, and second, it clarifies situations where they can make that decision. In particular, addressing lack of timeliness in removing material. So if someone doesn't remove the material, we can step in and remove it, then bill them. So it's just basically a clarification. I think it basically is trying to clean up how we actually currently operate.
Councilor Ray?
My only comment is that's not how you spell designees. Designees is spelled incorrectly.
Yes, I fixed that on the agenda item for Tuesday.
Councilor Marcotte?
Along with the agenda item, could you include some statistical information on how often a fine has been collected in the last fiscal year and
Certainly.
dollar amount received?
I think we provided some information recently on fines. Dave, isn't that correct?
Yeah, we can provide an update.
Okay, so we can provide that.
Any other questions on the council? Does anyone in the, sorry.
This will be on Tuesday's agenda.
Great. Does anyone in the public have questions for this agenda item? Great. We will move on to the second agenda item, which is 420 Main Street and a request for proposed changes to the Main Street traffic pattern and parking.
Good evening. Yeah, I'm Doug Green, City Planner, and I'm here to start the discussion here tonight on this agenda item, which is to discuss proposed changes to Main Street and Whipple Street for a proposed project at 420 Main Street. I'm just going to start out with just pulling up a map of the area that's under discussion, and it's Main Street, Whipple Street, and here is a vacant lot at 420. Oh, we're not up, are we? You were earlier. So, there we go. Is that just, I need to learn, I just kind of take a moment to let things open up a little more. So, there's the mapping of what I described. Again, here with the little waving hand is Main Street, Whipple Street, and 420 Main Street, a vacant lot right there. So I'm here to talk about that. The developers here, Mr. Norman Boulay and Mike Gatto is here with him tonight. They are proposing to construct a new Dunkin' Donuts at that property. And in order to promote traffic flow and safety into and out of the development site, the developer is proposing changes to Main Street and Whipple Street that would add a new center turning lane and widen a stretch of Whipple Street. By making these changes, some on-street parking along the west side of Main Street would be removed. Any changes to on-street parking and street configuration within a public right-of-way will require the city council approval. There's been a number of meetings on this proposal. Going back to September 5th, there was a neighborhood meeting here. Then a planning board meeting followed up shortly afterwards on September 10th. These were like just discussions of the proposal. And then again at a city council workshop on September 18th. Property owners in the area were notified of these meetings, and they attended and were opposed to these proposed changes. Some of the reasons for their opposition included loss of existing street parking, the inconvenience of tenants and clients to having to walk further to a parking space, pedestrian safety to and from the site, increased congestion of left turns, concerns that commercial and residential tenants will relocate, excuse me, due to a lack of parking. While 420 Main Street is not in a historic district, there was concern on impacts of the potential development to the historic character of the neighborhood by the proposed development. Potential for traffic backing from the site into Main Street, and not wanting to see the property developed into a Dunkin' Donuts, and potential negative impacts to property values. Since that time, the developer's traffic engineer has submitted a traffic assessment on February 12th, which was reviewed at a preliminary scoping meeting that was held on March 11th. There was an incorrect date in your packet. That was March 11th. Based on feedback received from that preliminary scoping meeting of a traffic study, a Main Street traffic safety assessment was submitted on April 15th. The developer is now proposing 3 mitigation steps, measures to Main Street and Whipple Street that they feel would improve safety conditions and traffic movement. The developer's traffic engineers determined, and you would see that in the Main Street traffic safety assessment, that the intersection at Main and Whipple Street is a high crash location. The developer has requested city departments and the other participants who were at that March 11th traffic scoping meeting, excuse me. They asked these folks who were in attendance to provide comments regarding those 3 specific recommendations that were coming out of from the developer to mitigate the safety concerns of that high crash location at Whipple and Main Street. So this memo continues on, and I'm not going to go into details of that, but there were those 3 mitigation measures were listed, and then various comments from the police, fire department, planning and code enforcement, a representative from the Maine Department of Transportation, and the city's peer reviewer from HTNB Consultants weighed in on those 3 different mitigation measures. To summarize, based on the data and analysis provided from the traffic analysis and the Main Street traffic safety study, the proposed mitigation measures are supported by the city staff and the participants in the preliminary scoping meeting of February 11th. The removal of some of the parking on the west side of Main Street would improve sight distance. The installation of a center turn lane on Main Street would facilitate traffic flow and safety into and out of the potential development site at 420 Main Street. And the widening of Whipple Street and the addition of additional parking would help improve access into and out of Whipple Street and should improve safety at a high crash location. The staff does want to mention that the proposed mitigation measures do not address issues that might come about from the actual proposal of a development on that site. And there's a whole separate review process and other issues that would be separate from what we're discussing here tonight. So I want to make sure that that was clear at the very end of my comments. So that's what I have to say to you right now. I can answer any questions. And then Mr. Mike Gatto is here to elaborate more and answer any other questions that you might have.
So any questions on the council for Mr. Green? Councilor.
So in looking at this map, I apologize, I should have looked at this before, but I see that Rainbow Federal Credit Union, or whatever it's called now, is also. Dirigo, thank you. Were there any traffic schedule amendments for that property that were made since they're redoing their space?
I might have to check with Dave Hediger on that. I was before I began working here, pretty much about the same time, but there was a traffic study for that.
So between Whipple and Holland Street, there is,
Yeah.
today there's kind of this no man's land out there. The road is very wide and striped without a turning lane.
Okay.
As part of their improvements, they're going to put a turning lane in that section. Yeah, Doug's highlighting it right now on the map there.
Right in here.
Okay.
The new-
And that's
new turn
a
lane.
two-way left lane?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilor Lyson.
Maybe for all three of you, I assume that this will replace the other Main Street Dunkin' Donuts. Will that's a pretty difficult turning area to, I don't know if it's been critically dangerous statistically, but, so that's being eliminated. So there's going to be an additional traffic study, if I understood correctly?
I would say that the preliminary scoping meeting started out the traffic study, and whether more information would be needed as we get into the actual,
Construction.
should these proposals move forward and any changes to Main Street are approved by the city council, then it might be likely that an actual development plan is submitted for that property. An additional evaluation would be made of the site and potentially some more traffic
Do the
study.
numbers trigger a DEP? Mike, that's a question for you. Do you know that as a fact?
I'm sorry, it triggers a DOT permit.
DOT
traffic-
permit.
Traffic movement
Yeah,
permit, which
okay.
we would have to complete.
Okay, great. DOT, not DEP. Thank you. So what we're looking at is really amendments to the parking in particular, but also some of the widths of, and the two-way left-hand turn lane, right?
Correct.
Which we have further up on Main Street.
Correct. The city council has jurisdiction over the striping layouts and on-street parking within the public right-of-way.
Because obviously, I think they're trying to address parking, which is obviously a major issue in that area as it's developed, so, and it's also part of my ward, so I'm talking to people a lot there who have concern about parking for the commercial enterprises that have gone into many of the historic buildings that are there, so. You know, again, going through development review here, and, you know, I'll be anxious to see the full-blown traffic study, because I think that's the big issue here. How do we make it more safe? And if we can do that through a development. The other thing is cost sharing. Are you looking into that at all, or is that down the road? I mean, you've got improvements on both Whipple, obviously the Main Street ones, that's funded probably through DOT and the city. I don't know, Dale, if that's true.
I mean, maybe we might have Mr.
Yeah.
Gatto
So-
come up here. He can more address the details of the proposal.
So- Can we
Generally,
limit-
off-site traffic improvements are the responsibility of the developer.
So can we just stick to questions for Doug right now, and
Sure.
then, so, because this is a high crash site, are we looking to make these traffic changes regardless of whether that 420 is developed or not?
Well, I think that's, that's what's being forwarded to you tonight in this discussion, is that it's been established through a more detailed study of that the intersection of Whipple and Main Street is a high crash location. So that's one of the motivating factors in the proposal from the developer, is to adding the turn lane that would increase the ability to get traffic into the site, and then adding, and Mr. Gatto can describe this in more detail, widening Whipple Street and adding more street parking there. They're suggesting that that would also work towards improving and relieving the high crash location factors. A lot of it is visibility, as I understand.
So this is really something that we need to consider whether or not there's a development taking place at 420 Main Street or not.
I would say so, yes.
Thank you. Counselor Pettingill.
It's kind of to go along with the mayor's comment about improving traffic safety there. When we looked at the crash rating, does it break down into detail of if it's traffic turning off Main onto Whipple, from Whipple to Main? You know, because I know you're aware of this, but, you know, the road is too wide there, and that contributes greatly to the traveling speed of people down the road. There's also an issue of time of day, if it breaks down into that as well, because that stretch right there is very poorly lit at night, which, you know, that travels down Main Street as you head towards Russell and out of town. But it's real dark down that way, and that'll contribute to those factors as well. I'm excited for this. The road improvements should increase safety. So, you know, like the mayor said, if this is a high crash area, you know, we need to take a look at doing that regardless of what happens at this site.
Yeah, as I understand it, the greatest factor is movement, both right turn, left turn out of Whipple. It's just because of parked cars, and I've experienced that myself. My wife and I go to Sunnyside Park quite a bit, and it's getting out onto Main Street is precarious, not being able to see with parked cars in the way.
So there's a height variance, right, as you come down there, so it's harder to see cars coming up over.
Yes, you're coming from a lower approach on Whipple Street, going up the hill, trying to look out onto Main Street, which is higher.
Right.
Counselor Ray.
One question I forgot to ask before, oh, you're all set? Okay, so there's a pedestrian crossing at Fry. Where are the other pedestrian crossings along this way? They don't seem to be marked here. There might not be any.
My understanding is further towards
not one at
downtown at
Elm and Main?
the other Dunkin' Donuts is in the hospital.
At the hospital, there's a
Not
cross,
far down.
Yeah.
but that's the only other.
There might be one at the Veterans.
I think there's one at the hospital.
Chris is
There's a
right
light
now 'cause his building's-
intersection where for
There's,
cars.
there's the light to go, enter into the hospital, and then there's a crossing at the emergency entrance of the hospital with one with the flash, with the lights overhead.
And to
And
the
then
park.
Fry.
Yeah, and then, yeah.
Is that, is pedestrian, gosh, sorry.
So there's a lot of streets on this side.
Yeah.
There's not a lot that.
There's no
connect to the
crossing at
others.
Elm,
Right.
though,
I don't think so, because
No.
at that
No.
point, you're already,
in the speeding zone, I feel like.
well, no, you're already closer to another crosswalk.
That's at Holland Street?
I'm not sure.
Next one over.
Next one in.
Holland,
Yeah, because right here is the hospital.
okay. Thank you.
Other questions on the council for Doug? Mr. Gatto, do you want to?
Madam Mayor and councilors, good evening. My name is Mike Gatto. I'm here tonight with Nam Bouet to talk about this project, and hopefully I'll be able to work these electronics and get through some of your questions. But we started this project, as Doug said, last September, and actually before that. I think Norm and I were talking earlier that we might have started last June looking at the concept and how we go about getting through this process, and started meeting with city staff and went to the meetings in September. After the meeting in September with the council, we felt comfortable enough to go forward and do most of the studies for a traffic movement permit. We didn't complete a full traffic movement permit application because you have to do a development plan and you have to do a survey. And we didn't want to spend those funds if the city was not interested in changing the striping plan as we're requesting. So the key to us is to get a nod from the council that you'll agree with the parking schedule change and you'll agree with the striping change so that we can then go forward and get full applications and approvals approved. We had said in my cover letter to you folks that we'd like you to do this as a conditional. If we don't get approvals, then the changes don't get made. If we do get approvals through site plan review, the changes would be made, okay? So just on the traffic movement permit process, we gave a traffic study. We now know that we need a left turn lane. Without question, for this project to happen, we need a left turn lane into the site. We also, because of the staff questions and the traffic expert questions, did a traffic assessment project, a traffic safety assessment. And that assessment is physically given to the traffic engineers. We have to request it, but the state does that. They look at a 3-year period at all the accidents at every intersection in the state, and you tell them what your study area is, and they'll give you a diagram back, and it's in the traffic safety assessment in the back of the document. And it tells what the accidents have been. There have been 10 at this intersection of Whipple and Main Street, and there are a critical rate factor of 1.47. I should look at my notes. The critical rate factor is 1.47. You have to have 8 accidents and a critical rate factor of 1 to be a high crash location. So we didn't do any calculations. The state told us nobody probably would have known that unless the city asked for it, or because we're doing development under today's traffic movement permit requirements, we as the developer need to go get that information and prove that our project can happen and be safe. And if there's any safety issues, we have to address those as part of the application. So we not only found the critical rate issue, we sent the traffic engineer out here, and he sat there. He looked at all the crash diagrams, time of day, the movements. 7 out of the 10 were movement from Maine into Whipple. No, I'm sorry, from Whipple out onto Maine, I'm sorry. Right and left turns from Whipple out onto Maine were 7 of the 10 accidents that occurred. And he analyzed what those were, and he sat there and watched the traffic himself for an hour or more, and came up with the recommendations that he had in his assessment. So I just wanted you folks to know that we're reacting to stuff given to us by somebody else, and we only ask for that data because the traffic movement process requires us to do it, okay? So anything that we're proposing here tonight is things that are going to happen, and Mr. Belay and his project are going to have to pay for those costs to do that. So I'll skip over some of my comments here. We had presented to the public and to the planning board and staff back in September 3 plans for changes to this. After analyzing the existing condition, which you see up there, we identified 29 parking spaces that are there existing. You know, abutters and others will argue that more than 29 cars can park there, and we agree 100%. But when we laid out the parking in this section, we laid it out as 8 by 22-foot spaces, because that's the standard space required, and we left spaces between driveways and stuff so that, you know, you're not blocking driveways and stuff, and we could fit mathematically 29 spaces in there. But I would give you on any given day, there might be 30 or 40 cars parked there. I don't know. So the option 1 was to eliminate all the spaces and put a center turn lane through Main Street, because we felt at the time that it would be safer for the traveling public. But once we heard input from the neighbors, we knew that we had to look at different ways to do the parking. So option 2 eliminated at that time 12 spaces, and option 3 at that time eliminated 15 spaces. Let me see if I can get this thing to work here. Okay, so this is the option 2 plan that we're proposing to talk with you folks about tonight. And on this plan, we are going to lose only 8 spaces, 2 in front of 410 Main Street. Superior Management is right here, and 3 in front of our site right here, and 3 in front of the 436 Main Street. We were able to accomplish that because the Dirigo project that was approved, the credit union project, was gonna start here at Hammond Street and was gonna put a center turn lane to Elm Street. And that center turn lane was going to be 12 feet wide, and it was gonna generate two 16-foot lanes either side of that center turn lane. My traffic engineer came up with the idea that we should start over here on Hammond Street and make the lane 16 feet wide, as proposed, and move over to here on Elm Street and reduce it to 12 feet at this location. So inbound traffic would have a 12-foot lane in front of Shapiro Management at Elm Street. That 12-foot lane would continue across to Whipple Street and all the way to the entrance of our project somewhere in here. And then the center lane would transition back to the center line of Main Street today at Curtis Street. This allowed us to keep all of the spaces on the east side of the street and eliminate only, as I said, 8 spaces on Main Street. It left 3 spaces here between Curtis and Arch that we would have eliminated under some of the other plans. So we're now down to 8 spaces. Shapiro Management owns or has a handicap space here in front of their place, so we're also asking the council to identify this space here on Elm, which is up at the top of the hill on Elm, as a handicap space, so to make up for the loss of their space. Back in September, we had offered to work with other abutters, and nobody came forward to have us work with them to help them fix some of their parking issues on site. But Mike and Jamie Shapiro did contact me, and I've been talking with them for quite some time about putting actual parking spaces right on their property. That's not here for debate tonight. I just wanted you to know that one of the neighbors did reach to us, and we are talking with them. And we're hopeful that we're going to be able to put some parking in their front yard as long as city code can be met, and we'll work with them to do that for them as part of our approval process with the city through staff family review. So we're not counting those spaces. I don't want the board, I just want you to know that we're talking with that one neighbor. As another option, we, right now, your Whipple Street is 24 feet wide of pavement. And unlike all the other streets in the neighborhood, Elm and Curtis and Arch, parking is limited to one side of the street with 24 feet of pavement. For whatever reason, Whipple Street allows parking on both sides of the street. So if you have 24 feet of pavement, you take 8 feet out for a car on one side, 8 feet for a car on the other side, you have 8-foot travel lane on Whipple Street if people are parked on either side. It doesn't happen, there don't seem to be, but you will sometimes have to weave through cars when you're driving on that road. We felt that to help mitigate some of the parking loss, that if we moved the sidewalk that's on the north side, our side of Whipple Street, and moved that sidewalk over and created a new 8-foot parking lane, widen the pavement and create an additional 8 feet for parking, along our frontage on Whipple Street, we could add 11 parking spaces to the system. Those would be legal spaces. Now, that said, people can still, under today's rules, and you may want to think about that, people can still park on the south side of Whipple Street. So it would reduce the travel lane to 16 feet, but that's a lot better than 8 feet. So again, we can't count these as additional spaces, but we're proposing to put it in because, again, your parking code allows for that. You'll see comments in the staff that they felt this was a good option to help make it move, people be able to move through that area, Whipple Street, when it happens. The other recommendation that we had in the traffic safety assessment was that we should post no parking sign on Whipple Street within 100 feet of the intersection. We're proposing to put a traffic sign here, which is 100 feet from Main Street, on the south side of Whipple Street. And we're proposing to put a no parking sign 50 feet from Main Street on the north side, because we're now moving the pavement over to put the parking in legal, so it's out of the travel lane, that 50-foot, the traffic engineer said would likely be acceptable. So we are proposing that there'll be, as part of your traffic and parking issues, that you would approve that those signs go in if the parking is constructed. So, again, we're looking at a 16 to 12-foot lane, 12-foot lane going the entire way until it transitions from our driveway out. We'll be able to provide 13-foot lane along the other side of Main Street, and we're able to provide a 12-foot turning lane for the project. Based on all of the studies we've done so far, we believe all of that will pass through the approval process. I totally skipped my entire presentation. So we've addressed, at this point, when we started this process, we didn't know for sure if we needed a turn lane. We now know. We didn't have any idea there was an accident issue here, and none of the neighbors talked about it, and nobody else talked about it until we did the thing. And so we know we have a high crash location. 3 recommendations by the traffic engineer. Our proposal will address all 3, and that will get fixed as part of this project if we get our approvals. We are, again, we're seeking a conditional, subject to us getting all the permits we need to get this project done. NOM has been looking for a site to move his 321 Main Street location. It hasn't been available. This site became available with the changes in ownership of that property, as well as the changes in the Duncan concept. This site is one of the only areas in this neighborhood that we could put that location. Otherwise, we'll have to stay where we are. So we think this is better. I think if you look at staff comments, the police department indicated that they felt this was a good scenario to alleviate some of the congestion down there at 321 and make traffic movement safer on the street. So, again, I think I've addressed the comments, but if I miss one of your questions, I'm happy to try to answer them, and we'd like to have an opportunity to respond if we have time tonight after the public speaks. But
Councilor LaJoy.
Yes, thank you. Going back on Elm Street, you have the handicap parking space right there.
yes,
When traffic comes towards Main Street, what's the distance between Main Street and the parking space?
that's an existing parking space right now, so it's probably like 25 feet.
Okay, so we have vehicles coming out of Elm Street, and we have 3 deep waiting to turn. And then we have somebody coming down Main Street that wants to turn onto Elm Street. Will they be able to do that?
It'll be very narrow. It'll be very narrow, and it'll be very difficult. Again, it's an existing parking space, so we were trying to help Sapiro with replacement of this one they have on Main Street. And I think Sapiro would tell you that this one on Main Street works very well. And since they're losing it, that's why we wanted to put it here. If the council didn't want that, and if you wanted to sign that, we are proposing to work with them to construct at least 1 space in their front yard, and hopefully 2.
I guess my concern is the fact of the traffic jam it may cause on Main Street, let alone cause some type of traffic jam on Elm Street as well.
Every time I've been through the area, and it hasn't been daily, but I've been through there every month or so since we've started working on this project, there are cars parked there. There's not a lot of traffic movements there, but those spaces are there, so we were talking about striping that space that was there. And again, those are good questions, and we should be able to address those during the development review.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Lyson.
Thank you. One of the things you found out at this stage is that you would need a left-hand turn lane into
Right.
your site.
If we can't get a left turn lane into this site, this project doesn't work.
And any any knowledge on why Main Street is so wide in front of the credit union area?
The standards years ago, when Main Street was done, was to keep things wide. And I'm guessing before all of the turning movements and stuff, that, you know, that's the way you put snow and other things. I mean, engineers always liked wide roads. The city's always had real wide standards, 28 for local streets and 32, but.
But I think we're, you know, with our Complete Streets programs, we're trying to look at multiple uses on the roads too. So.
Again, I think that if you were to eliminate parking and put esplanades in and narrow the pavement, it would be a better, safer road.
Yeah. So, one of the other things that I think the council needs to, and the public, once you get up to Fry Street and beyond, there's other parking issues.
Correct.
And safety issues as people try and get out of, and we've been looking at talking to some of the owners of property along there to say, we can't get out of our driveway safely, you know, because of parking and sight distance issues and such, so.
Well, one of the things when I did my existing condition study, and again, I identified the parking spaces based on legal striping. If the city, which costs money, were to stripe the spaces and leave people sight distance so they could get out of their driveways, there'd be far less cars able to park on the street, which is what we identified, is
Yeah,
29
I mean,
in this corridor. so.
I don't disagree with you there if it was done. And I've been out in that area quite a bit. And obviously, you know, we know Fry Street is, you know, where a tragedy happened.
Right.
But now there is a signalized intersection. It seems to work well. But again, you've got people coming up, when you've got that wide lane,
Yep.
you're putting your foot on the gas and you're going a lot faster. So I think some of the new movement, and it took a while for Main Street out, you know, near Martin's area and where the two-way left-hand turn lane, there's some learning that has to be done. But I've used it a lot, and people who, you know that you can make a left-hand turn, get in that lane, that's kind of a safety thing too. So it's not that it's not gonna take some education and some getting used to, but there's other spots in the city, including Main Street, that already have it, so.
Out of Main Street is a 3-lane section, and out of Lisbon Street, we changed many years ago for a project on out of Lisbon Street to 3 lanes from 4.
So-
And it makes it safer if you can do that, because people can pull out into that center turn lane.
So suffice to say, if we were not to allow the reconfiguration and striping and elimination of the parking, that this project would not go forward.
That is correct. This project would not go forward. Now, there was a comment about what would happen if we don't do this project. Will you guys have to address that? And I'm not talking with expertise, but I did talk to my traffic engineer a little while ago, and he did say that typically a critical high crash location will go on a list at the state, and they identify them in priorities, and they rank them based on what's the most difficult one in the state, and as funds allow, they come in and fix them. So if we don't fix this as a developer, it may not get fixed for years until the city can fund it or until the state comes in and funds a safety improvement project. That's how the system works. They rate these intersections every 3 years. They pull a new list. They look at 3 years to see whether things are changing, and then they address them as they can. But I think the state would tell you that they have no money, so it could sit on the list, you know, for a long time. But now that the city knows about it, whether it should be addressed is really up to you folks. But again, we're offering to do that with this approval.
Other questions of the council? Questions from the public on this agenda item? So if you could just come to the podium up here. And just state your name and address, and everyone there's a 3-minute limit on public comment.
Hi, Mike Shapiro, 410 Main Street. I own the property they were talking about. I had a question. The access onto Main Street from Dunkin' Donuts is going to be where? Whipple Street and...
Between,
They closed it down, but I can show you on the screen. It's right
Okay,
here.
but-
So it's on Main Street.
So they'll be able to get in and out from here?
In and out on Main Street.
Okay.
and that's between the Whipple Street and the Arch Street,
It's between Whipple and Curtis.
Curtis, I'm sorry.
Right.
Curtis.
So it's coming from the property?
Correct.
Okay. So it's not coming from the side streets?
No, you can't get onto the side street because of grades. It drops almost 12 feet in 100 feet down Whipple Street.
Okay, I have some things to say, but I'm not sure this is the time to say it.
Yep.
This is just a question you asked about. Is it all right to say something else? All right, 35 years ago, when people were talking about Auburn being the shopping city of choice compared to Lewiston and Auburn, that's been tossed around for years, but I decided to move from Auburn to Lewiston. And the hearing aid center that is there has been there that long, and obviously we deal with people who are over 65, 70 years old, and are handicapped and have handicap licenses. The removal of the handicap place in front is a problem because it's really easy to get out of the car and straight in. And I also want to say at this time that I'm in business, and it would be stupid for me to say I'm not in favor of Dunkin' Donuts because they're another business. So I am in favor of growth, and the city needs growth because without that, you can't function either. But it's nice to be able to accomplish a live and let live situation where those 2 spaces in front on the lawn could be turned into handicap so that the people will still be allowed to come there and do business the way they've been doing for 35 years. I just feel that if you know and could help Mike, who has been working with me and has been, as far as I'm concerned, doing a great job. He seems to cover all the bases and knows how important these spaces are for us, not 1 but 2. Because we basically, you said there were 2 spaces in the front of my office, but there's always been 3 cars that park there. So we've been living with 3, and I'm willing to go down to 2 if I have to put them in the front to continue to operate. And Mike thinks it's, something that can be done. So I'm just mentioning that to you so that, you would also help the cause.
What he's talking about is that I think there are 3 cars that typically park where those two cars are between Whipple and Elm. And he and I have been talking, and we've done some sketches on GIS where we could potentially put 2 parking spaces in front of his building on his lawn that would meet handicap accessibility. The question with staff and with us is whether or not we can meet setback for those 2 spaces, or whether we can only get 1. And once I get surveys and stuff, we'll be able to answer those questions. But Mike is looking for 2 or 3, but I think we're gonna get 1 or 2.
2. Well, two is essential. Without the 2, we're in trouble because there's always somebody being waited on that's in a car. There's somebody waiting to come next that's usually waiting to be there. That's 2 cars. And then sometimes people come early. So there's 3 handicap car people that can be there at any one time, usually are there at any one time. And again, using 3 in the front, having them now, and giving them up for 2 I can live with, but I do need those 2. And again, I would welcome the addition of Dunkin' Donuts because it's growth. If we can do it, the right way. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Sure. And you can either use this table or you can use the podium that's back there if that's easier.
My name is Tim Kelly. I'm the owner of 437 Main Street, where the church is. I'm the pastor there. And just a couple things here. I knew that Mr. Lulay, he said if there would be continued opposition that he would gladly back down from the proposal, so I hope he keeps his word on that from the last meeting. With the increase now, is the Dunkin' Donuts down towards the hospital going to close if this one opens up?
I think that's yes.
Is the one on Strawberry Avenue going to close if this one opens up? No. Okay, so we're not, this is not, really an improvement to the city. It is not, adding another business, it's just changing business from one place to the other. So there's no growth going on there at all. As to the high crash zone there, because of on-street parking, I would have to agree. You know, anywhere in the city where there's on-street parking is dangerous. On-street parking is always more dangerous than not on-street parking. Absolutely, absolutely. And so every staff, every, city council, every police station, fire station, everybody would agree that on-street parking is dangerous. But, I mean, we're going to eliminate it all over the city. That would infringe on people's rights, just like, all ovens and stoves are dangerous also. For just a quick proposal, if you just make Whipple Street a one-way street going west, that would eliminate all of that crash zone right there. Boom. And you wouldn't have to worry about any of the other things. But for us who have our businesses along that, from the apartments to our church to Keenet's lawyer's office and counseling services there and on down, once you eliminate that west side parking, all of the apartments are going to be stacking up that parking all the way down, and everybody's going to have to be shuffling on down past Fry. And as you notice, past Fry now, Bates College is using that now also. So it just doesn't make any sense that we would have to change all of our parking just to accommodate another business to come in. And so that is our great concern, is it's going to start depreciating our business, our people coming, whether it's business or church or the apartments. And for what? Because we want to allow another business just to change locations. It isn't like a new business is coming in. And plus, then with that Dunkin' there, even though that's supposedly this high crash zone, which 5 fender benders in a period of 3 years that's not that dangerous.
It's actually 10, sorry.
Was it 10?
10 accidents.
Okay, I read 5 on one of the reports. I must have mislooked. But with that said, the increase of activity is going to offset the safety that we just gained. I mean, it's really going to create a lot of activity there and movement. So we really need to take that into consideration. But this isn't not a crash problem. It is really a parking problem. And we'll lose the intimacy of all of our businesses right there along there. It will greatly, it won't just a little bit affect us, it'll greatly affect us. There's 20 units in that apartment right there across from his street, right across the street from him. And all those people are going to be taking up parking, and we're just have to keep on piggybacking all the way down 2-3 blocks on down. So this does not improve the neighborhood at all, and doesn't even increase the safety, like I say, when it increases the activity going in and out of there. So these are things that I really hope you all take into consideration, because it is going to affect us on a negative impact. Is there any questions that you would have for us as some of the neighborhood constituents from the council?
It's not a back
Okay.
and forth, sorry.
Okay, all right.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public on this item? Sure.
My name is Kathleen Keenitz, and I own the building at 443 Main Street. I have my law office there. It's an elder law office, so not only Mr. Shapiro has elderly people who are struggling with parking issues on Main Street, but I do too. And I also have 5 units, I believe, right now that I'm renting to counselors. And I have a tiny parking lot in back that accommodates just my clients and staff. But the counselors are always struggling, as are their clients, to find parking. So elimination of any parking on Main Street is going to have a bad impact on me, my tenants, and all of our clients. It seems a convenient fact for Mr. Boulay that this turns out to be a high crash area. I have been there for 15 years now, and I remember maybe 2 crashes. I'm there every business day, 9 to 5, basically. So it happens, but no one would have noticed it had he not done this. And I would submit that when you move the traffic that's currently in the lower Main Street Dunkin' Donuts that he is currently operating and bring it over here, it's going to make a much worse traffic situation, even with the left turn lane. It's not going to enhance the neighborhood. That particular lot may not be in the historic district. My building is. And I think maybe Pastor Tim's is too, I'm not sure. But we are right on the border of the historic district, which, you know, I'm very proud of that. And I've put a lot into my building, as has Tim and other owners of buildings there. And I know it's not a zoning question, but it should be a consideration in the cost-benefit analysis that the city goes through. What's the city getting out of this? You're moving a high-traffic business from an area that's already high-traffic to an area that is largely residential and small business and historic in nature. It's just, it really is going to denigrate the quality of life. It's going to denigrate the appearance of that part of the city. And for what? Moving it from a spot where, in my opinion, it's appropriately placed to a spot that's going to hurt a lot of people. Mr. Boulay had told us at the last meeting that if the neighborhood doesn't want it, he won't do it. And I took heart in that. I thought, well, that's great. That's you know, he's really listening to us. But here we are again. So please do consider what the city's going to gain if they allow this and what it's going to lose. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chris Aceto, 425 through 431 Main Street. I have an apartment building on the street. I think that was a slip of the tongue, but I can also affirm that Mr. Boulay also said that was September 5th meeting, that if there was pushback from owners on the street of losing parking, then he would not move forward. I think it was just a gesture to kind of get us in a mood where, okay, get us more open-minded property owners to the concept of putting the Dunkin' Donuts and losing parking in that area. It's just a parking issue. That's what it boils down to. This is, for us, nothing more than a parking issue. We are going to lose 30% of the parking on that street. If there's 29 spaces and you lose in 8, it's about 30%. But it's actually greater than 30% because, as you know, Bates College students there's no longer parking behind Main Street, the street on Oak Street, rather. So if you go in the last 18 months at 8 in the morning up Main Street, you'll see that Bates College students park all the way from Elm up into almost Mountain Avenue, halfway up to Mountain Avenue, both sides of the streets. So there's a extra premium on parking. And how do you know if they're Bates? It's easy to know. You see the decals for Bates College. You've seen that, right? You're not in? Okay, so, I mean, so in addition to losing 30% of the parking, there's that much more people trying to park in that area because parking has been removed on Oak Street. So there was probably an assumption that when parking was removed on Oak Street, that people could find parking in other spots. Where they moved to was up onto Main Street. So it's a parking issue for me, and there's no net gain. I mean, you're taking an existing business 500 yards up the street, moving it down the street 500 yards, and to do so, you're removing parking for businesses that are already operating. And we know that if this was a business that did not have a drive-through, then we would not need a turning lane. So any business outside of a drive-through business could exist in that spot. And we would have a different discussion here because people would be telling owners, we would not be losing our parking. So if there was a business that did not require a drive-through, for example, any other business, architect company with 25 employees, social service agency, you name it, any type of typical business would not need that turning lane, which in turn would not eat up the parking. Lastly, in terms of a crash site, if it's identified now as a crash site, then there are alternatives that the city can do, not only on Main Street, but other parts of the city, on Lisbon Street, to slow the traffic, or to, a turning light is not the solution to causing a high crash site to become less of a high crash site. And lastly, I would argue that between Whipple Street, if you investigated there, Whipple Street all the way up to the current Dunkin' Donuts is a high crash site area. There's always crashes in front of I think it's a 13-unit brick building almost near the medical center. A little bit further up, I guess that'd be east-west, south of this location. And also I'd like to know, what is in terms of a high crash site location, is that radius 10 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet? Does it exist? Is it 100 yards from that's identified as a high crash site? In other words, is it dead center on that corner, or is it within 100 yards, 200 yards? Because on police calls, for example, sometimes police calls will identify one location as the main location for the police call, even though it may be 200 or 300 yards from that primary location. It might not be, in terms of like a commercial location. Someone could call the police for some type of problem at 420 Main Street, at the Dunkin' Donuts where it exists now, and it may be reported as the prime location for the police call, but it could be 100 yards, 200 yards, 300 yards from that. But in summary, although I appreciate the developers tried to limit the loss of parking, and I'm sure he's put in a lot of work, time and money, I think that there's, I still don't want to lose any parking. We talked about this from day one. The developer said that if people were in the neighborhood did not want Dunkin' Donuts in that area, that he would move away from that project and stay where he is now. And there's no net gain. I can't imagine the idea that the city is going to take away 30% of the parking on that street or in that little small area so that a Dunkin' Donuts can move 500 feet up the street. It's not a new business. It's the same thing. There's no net financial gain to the city. Thanks.
Other comments on this item? So, question for the city administrator. So the traffic study was, so when we're talking about a high crash site, it's the Maine Department of Transportation that has identified it as maybe this is...
That's correct.
Right, so this isn't the developer?
That's correct. It comes from the state.
Correct. Okay, thank you. So we don't actually...
Okay, because can I address a
Sure,
couple
go ahead.
quick questions to Mike?
Sure.
Would you mind? Thank you. Kind of reacting to Mr. Aceto's couple of his questions. Is it true that the drive-through lane drives the center lane requirement? Or just the nature of the business and the amount of trips? Or, I mean, what drives that?
The left turn lane analysis is driven by any business that generates somewhere around 25 turning movements left into the site. Doctor's office.
Per hour?
In a peak hour.
The peak hour.
Yeah, so let's just say it was a doctor's office, and they had a bunch of patients that were coming in from, and we identify, these traffic engineers identify where the trips are coming from. And they say, well, the trips are coming from in-town Lewiston. That a doctor's office could, not usually.
So it's not necessarily just the
It's not just the drive-through. I do agree that the drive-through, like a Dunkin', McDonald's, those typically are the ones where you're seeing the left turn lanes typically. But it's driven by a number related to the traffic on the road, total number of trips. In this case, our traffic study had to up the peak hour to 1,435 trips on this section of the road, a Whipple Street intersection, during the peak hour. So we're analyzing this with a growth from what the current count was 1,300. So it's driven by that trip, and it's driven by the movements going into the site and the direction people are coming.
And a second question, thank you, Mayor. Does in fact the center lane also cause the reduction of that high accident rate at Elm?
The traffic engineer identified that most of the accidents were coming out. The other accidents were people turning while people are coming in and on Main Street, turning off Main Street and people coming and hitting at an angle. So he identified that if you gave somebody a place to wait, okay, like a center turn lane, they would be out of the way and they could turn, wait, and it wouldn't be backing up traffic behind them. So nobody's anxious. So he did recommend that a designated left turn or center turn lane be installed to correct the issue.
And finally, just to address Mr. Aceto's question concerning the accident locations, there's a report that was filed that you might want to take a look at called the 2015 to 17 Accident Summaries, Main Street, Elm to Fry. And the locations are Main at Elm, Main at Whipple, Main at Curtis, Main at Fry, and then stretches between Elm and Whipple, Whipple and Curtis, Curtis and Arch and Fry. So there are numbers of accidents and the critical rate factor for all of those locations, and that's in that file. You may want to take a look.
And that was the study area that all the experts sitting in the pre-scoping meeting said, look at this from here to here. We could have gone farther and asked for the data and could have gotten it. If you look at the very last page, you'll see a diagram of where the accidents, I believe it's the very last page, you'll see a diagram where the accidents occurring. So all of that data is in and I believe been shared with abutters and other people.
Thank you. That's it.
So you can use the podium back there. And just to remind folks, public comment is limited to 3 minutes per person.
I'm Beth Kelly, and I'm at 437 Main Street, too. And I just wanted to express a little concern about our people with children crossing. If we're supposed to park at Whipple Street, down Whipple Street, they're going to have to cross Main Street with small children coming to church. And we have 3 services, Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night. And to me, that's a concern. There's really nowhere for them to cross except for clear down to Fry Street. And like Keenitz has older people that are coming to her place, and Aceto does too. I mean, they're expected to park clear down Whipple Street, you know, carry their groceries through the week or whatever, our people coming to church. And just a simple, to me anyway, I'm not an engineer, but just making Whipple Street a one-way street seems fairly simple and would eliminate some of the crashes for people coming. Has better visibility where I'm not on the slant on the hill trying to come onto Main Street. So I just want that to be a consideration too. We have people that are going to have to cross the street with several small children.
Thank you. Yeah, Councilor.
I have a question of either planning or public works. I think on Google Maps I found the remnants of a crosswalk mid-block between Elm and Holland. Could we check into that?
Mid-block crosswalks are not typically
Right.
safe.
So it should
That
either
might
be
be why it
fully
was
erased
eliminated,
or, yeah, just, thank you.
Councilor Marcotte.
Question for Mike Gatto. Couple of questions. I'm intrigued by the safety aspects of this, and I do agree with reducing parking along thoroughfares like Main Street. But I heard something tonight about an idea with regards to making Whipple and Elm Street one-ways. Any ideas on that?
I wouldn't want to touch that. I'm sorry, I didn't talk with the traffic engineer about it. I never envisioned that the city would ever go along with something like that. There's heavy traffic on that road. I don't know why, but there's heavy traffic on that road, so. Certainly, city could look at that.
Because in one aspect, because of the narrowness of the streets, that could be a benefit. But on the other side of the token, you're probably going to increase the ingress and egress from each of those streets, because you'll be doubling up that number. Twice as many will be going into one street, twice as many will be going out of the other. So I was intrigued by that. The other thing is, the parking, side of the street parking along Whipple. And you suggested that you were going to eat into the property line, move that 8 feet in.
Yes,
Who's going to be paying for that reconfiguration and
We are.
striping? 100%?
yeah.
And
And the sidewalk will actually be on our land, which we'll give the city an easement for.
okay, and what about the striping along Main Street?
It
bears
is
the cost?
typically the developer's responsibility, and I would expect it to be our responsibility in this case as well. That's part of the traffic movement permit process. You know, that you do off-site improvements, you want this to work, you prove that it can work, and you pay for the improvements to do that. So it's not unheard of that I'm doing projects where we're doing exactly this type of thing, or even building a lane in the street.
Okay. I'm also curious, when we're talking about Shapiro hearing, is that building along Whipple? Because it's hard to see with some of
The
the...
Shapiro ice place is off from Elm, and he owns the apartment building at the corner of Whipple as well. So he owns that whole frontage, okay?
Okay, so the business is,
Is the building that's on Elm Street.
that's on Elm Street that
Yeah.
has parking, or maybe it's not his, but
He has parking in the back,
in the back.
okay, but his customers typically park along Elm Street or on those 2 spots, which typically are filled with 3 cars.
Are you saying that there's green space on the corner of
There's
Elm?
green space between the right-of-way and his building, which I believe is sufficient that we can fit 2 spaces in. Staff has looked at the plan I did, said prove it, and so we need a survey to do that. We hadn't spent the money at this point.
Because I'm not liking the little orange square that I'm seeing for a handicap site across the street.
And again, that's an existing spot, and typically you wouldn't have a handicap space on Main Street either, but it's been there, there's 1 handicap space there, and he probably has 3 handicap patients using that area, okay? I wouldn't doubt him at all, so, but there is 1 handicap space there, so we thought that space would be a good place for it. As you go beyond that space, the grade is steeper, and it's really not handicap accessible. So the one, Councilor LaJoy, I think, added some good questions that we'll have to look at. If this goes forward, we'll have to look at that parking and see whether it'll actually work on Elm Street, and if it doesn't work, then we wouldn't propose it.
Okay, so the grade doesn't start to go downhill until you get past that?
Yeah,
parking
I mean, again, in my visual inspection, the grade in front of his building and the grade there across is generally acceptable for handicap use. But shortly after that, I parked down behind the red car that shows on this photo, and it's steeper down there.
steeper down there?
It drops from a first floor level at Main Street to a basement walkout, I believe, in the back of the building.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so that wraps up the workshop on 420 Main Street, and we will
Ma-
now,
Madam Mayor, just for everybody's benefit, since we have people here, this would probably be coming forward to the council for as a formal action at the meeting on June 18th. But we have to do a little bit of work to try to define this all, so you have a formal proposal in front of you to vote on. So we will for sure make sure that everybody who's here and has been notified about this in the past will again be notified about the meeting where the council will actually make a decision on this.
thank you.
Oh, yeah,
Councilor Beam?
I have a question. Thank you. There are several things still up in the air that you were talking about, to see whether or not it would be possible to have two spaces in that area, in that green area, and several other things that you had to have surveyed to be sure about. Are we going to know that before we have to vote on
The,
on this?
the parking, and again, we've talked a lot about the parking at Shapiro tonight, and he's noted that he wants it, and we've noted that we're gonna try to give it to him. That's really not in the purview of what we're asking here tonight. What we are asking is the striping change, and we're not wanting to spend a lot of money on surveys and designs and stuff, without knowing that there's interest on the council side to accept the striping change. It's the parking along the street, and it's the striping change that's important for this project. If you folks say no, then there's no reason for us to move forward.
Well, I think part of accepting the striping change for me would be that we know for sure about some of these other things that we're not sure about unless a survey is done. If the surveys, I just don't feel comfortable voting on something when there's something left in the open that might not happen, that could happen. So rather than to say, gee, we weren't able to do a survey and we don't know for sure that we can put those two cars there, or, I would.
Putting those cars there is a staff review or planning board process that will take several months.
Okay, so we'll know that before we decide to
No.
striping?
But we're not also
Other
approving,
councilors
we're
are
not approving the
comfortable.
project either, we're approving just the striping that's on the road.
Before we get too far down this road, just a reminder that the site plan process is the planning board process, not the council process. So if you approve this and the project goes forward, this project will not come back to you for any further action. It will go to the planning board for site plan approval. One possibility, and I'd obviously like to get a reaction from the developers, we could certainly make the change contingent on certain other things happening.
Okay. That makes me more comfortable.
And again, we can accept that. We have already told you folks, contingent upon us getting all state and local approvals. So contingent upon having an agreement with Mr. Shapiro is fine with me, okay? And I already know what that means to him, okay?
Right, he
And you do
needs
as
two
well.
cars, two
And
spaces.
again, if we get agreements from him, that's what I'm looking for. But again, it's up to you folks. We're asking you, we will spend tens of thousands of dollars to go through this complete process once we're done. And so we didn't want to spend all that money if you then come to you and say, well, can you change the traffic? And you say no. We hear the public. We know we're putting you in a spot. We think we have a good plan. We think we've mitigated the parking on the west side of the street with Whipple Street. We weren't necessarily saying that parking is for the folks on the east, but we don't care who works, it's public parking. So that's why we're here tonight, to talk to you about it and then formalize the plan that you folks are comfortable with.
It does sound a lot better than the first time that we heard
Right.
about it, because there were a lot of problems with parking then, and it seems like there are fewer now, and might make the, I understand about making the left turn onto Whipple Street and Elm Street also easier and safer. I was wondering about a crosswalk.
We did, there've been a lot of comments about crosswalk, and I apologize. We did talk about a crosswalk in September. We did talk at the scoping meeting, and the city has done a study to determine where the crosswalks on Main Street have been done. And the study shows the crosswalk at Fry and the one down by the hospital, I believe, and staff can give you more data on that. So we had not proposed one anywhere else, but if somebody felt there needed to be one during the review process, we could add it in as long as it was not a mid-block, it was at an intersection.
Is that a possibility?
Right now, the engineers didn't want it.
Right.
You know, the engineers did not want another crosswalk,
No,
okay?
so
The
that's
traffic
what we
experts,
heard.
but-
The engineers, state?
state,
DOT?
A-Track engineer and the city peer review engineer and staff and police and fire, you guys, again, went through an extensive review of your crosswalks on your main corridors because of the safety issue at Tri, and that study did not recommend another crossing, so.
I guess I had another question. It might be with Mr. Boulay. I just wondered why you want to move, because we've heard a lot of reasons why people would prefer that you not move, but, and this crosswalk thing has come up, and that's a good reason for putting in the turning lanes. But I'm thinking, is there anything the city could do to make your present location easier?
We've tried just about everything, and the last development I did last year was to try to help that. It didn't help. We can't, for the size of location we have, we can't eliminate any parking spaces by city code. So we're very limited. We're out to the property line as far as we can get. With the new style Dunkin' with the dual drive-through and then an express pickup window, it'll actually be 3 drive-through lanes, 2 of them with menu boards and 1 by your phone app, which is growing quite popular. So that will triple our speed on the drive-through we have now. The current location, we can't do any of these improvements. We can't even get the footprint of the new style of Dunkin'. So basically, I'm backed into a corner where I have no other choice but to move the location. If there was any other way that I just remodel what I had and make it work, I would gladly do that because it's a lot less expensive.
Yeah.
But to take care of the issues I'm having and to modernize the building, which you all know the place, it needs severe update, and the only way I can do that is by adding the drive-through lanes and an express window. And this is the only location that's become available in years. I mean, we've been looking on Main Street since, I don't know, 1978, 79, it's been that long. There's not a lot of property that comes available because of the hospital. And the hospital wants our property now pretty badly. When they heard about the first meeting, they were on the phone quite heavily trying to purchase the property. So I'm really backed into a corner here where I really have no choice in the matter. So if we want to fix the problems and modernize it, it's about all they can do. I'd rather not have the expense, but really, not much choice.
Can I ask Councilor Lyson a question?
We don't typically,
We can't do that, okay?
can you catch up with him after the?
I will do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so we will close the workshop on this agenda item and move on to agenda item number 3, which is medical and adult use marijuana.
Thank you, David.
It is.
Isn't this what we already had?
Yeah. I don't know what test it, well, we were missing page 2.
Yes,
2, 4, 6.
I was only missing page 2.
I read it online and it was fine, so.
Oh, then you passed it. Counselor Marcotte brought that to my attention, so.
I did
needs
go
paper?
online, yeah. Who needs these trees?
He's into the odd pages.
I'm ready. You ready?
All you.
All right, so,
2 minutes.
3.
that would be
Okay, 3
great.
minutes.
That would be excellent. That would be
Staff's
excellent.
only 2 minutes.
So, okay, so we are back. We talked to you folks back, originally back in December, where you folks acted on the ordinance to basically not allow any type of medical marijuana uses in the community except for caregivers up to growing for 30 plants. So that's all you can currently do in the city. Prior to that, we were allowing caregiver grow operations and we were allowing retail operations. the retail operations you see now are now legally non-conforming. You can't have any more retail operations in the community. So at that point, you folks made it clear that you wanted to talk more about this. We came back to you in February suggesting that we'd regulate both adult use and medical marijuana the same.
Dave, can I just ask how many non-conforming retail businesses we currently have? Is it 6?
Oh, I don't know off the top of my head. I want to say it's probably a dozen, though. Yeah, there's more than you may think. I don't know that it's more than a dozen, but I can tell you it's more than 4. So great, we suggested that we regulate these the same, both adult use and medical marijuana, from the same perspective. There's certainly different statutes that the state adopted, and the state hasn't even come up with the rules yet for regulating adult use. They're working on that right now, but medical marijuana is out there, and they keep on tweaking it. And most of the guys here in the audience tell me what they can and can't do, because they're one step ahead of everybody. We have been licensing caregivers for about, I think, since 2010. So we're one of the few communities that were actually licensing them. And we did that both through getting a use permit through planning and code enforcement, and a license through the clerk's office. And basically, it was just some minor performance standards that were similar to the state's, as far as making sure electrical's up to speed, making sure distances from schools were met, security systems, things of that nature. So we came back to you with some suggestions back on March 12th. And from that, it was suggested that we talk with the caregivers. We had a meeting with the caregivers on April 17th. We probably had about 24 people in here. Myself and Chief O'Malley met with them, and we basically shared with them the March memo that we provided you folks, saying, hey, what do you guys think? What do you like? What don't you like? And we've made some changes reflected based upon those comments, because they brought up some good points. I guess I'm going to kind of skip to page 2. Where we talk about recommendations and definition recommendations. Similar to last time, we're talking about combining the use groups. So you folks have a table in front of you. One column says adult use marijuana. The next one's a medical use, and then proposed ordinance. So as we look through those, the idea is we're going to come up with definitions on the right side that's going to cover these other uses. So we will have, like, for example, adult use has a cultivation definition. Medical marijuana doesn't have a definition for medical. We will come up with a medical cultivation definition, and so on and so forth going down. So you can see how we've grouped these together. A lot of these definitions we're probably going to look towards the state statutes for. We don't necessarily, I am by no means an expert in this, and, but at the same time, we're going to look at state statutes for reference so we can be consistent with what they're proposing. Zoning districts. I think when you folks are talking about this, and I know at some point there's been considered by some counselors that you'd like to look at all these use groups separately at some point, like, okay, let's act upon retail, and where's that going to go, and what are the performance standards? Let's act upon manufacturing, where are those going to go, what are the performance standards, that type of thing. So as we think about these district regulations, whether we do it all as one action at one point or individually, just keep that in mind. Zoning district recommendations. So again, not too much is changing there from what we initially talked about. Districts in which we currently permit industrial and light industrial uses would be considered for cultivation, manufacturing, testing, nurseries, and dispensaries. So that's your industrial, your urban enterprise, your mill, your highway, business, and your office service. And this is way too busy of a map, but I'll give you an example of like this area here. So where you just see like the lighter blue color, and let me get a hand on here. So if you guys see like where my hand is moving around, that's kind of exit 80 area, Gender Business Park, that part of the world. That's an industrial zone. That's where we'd be allowing those more intense uses. Where you see the hatched areas right above it, that's an area where we might be allowing both retail stores and industrial uses. You'll see in the next bullet there on the top of page 3, marijuana stores would be limited to the same districts that we currently allow retail uses in. Riverfront, community business, highway business, Centerville, urban enterprise, and mill. Part of the reason we came up with that is if you can have a pharmacy, why can't you have a medical or adult use retail store? you know, the argument's been made that those types of facilities, you know, they're selling, some of them are stated, you know, they're obviously pharmacies, they're dealing with different types of drugs. Obviously, they sell cigarettes, they're selling, some of them are licensed liquor stores. I mean, there's plenty of social ills that go in that if someone wants to group marijuana into that same category. At the same time, we have retail establishments in the community that people aren't even aware of. Honestly, we haven't really received any complaints about retail operations. I can't speak for the police department, but usually the phone calls we get about our odor. That's how we find out about establishments usually. I haven't had any real complaints about any of the retail establishments. I've had a couple comments about the signs, about people not necessarily liking the signs, but I mean, that could hold true for any commercial business in town. If you don't like golden arches for some reason, I can't really tell you what to do about, you know, golden arches. Performance standards is, I think, where you folks would be most concerned with. That's really going to dictate how these establishments operate, where they're going to be located. And this is where we've made some changes from when we talked to you folks back in March. Odor, that's, again, as I mentioned, probably the number one complaint we get, whether it's people growing for themselves, both either adult use or recreationally, medical, at their home or in some commercial location. That's usually the complaint we get, and I believe the police department gets as well. So we're looking to put standards on there that says, hey, you just cannot detect it off the premise. Otherwise, it becomes a nuisance, and we're gonna take enforcement action. Honestly, I think some of the caregivers are split about that. I think some of them recognize that, yeah, maybe we can do that, and there's measures we can take. Others, I think, are a little concerned that we may be, maybe that's not achievable. People talk about country kitchen, and, you know, they don't like the smell of donuts. How come I'm not writing them up? I don't know, because I like donuts, I don't know, you know. So that, I mean, I understand the comparisons and the arguments there, but our recommendation is that with respect to marijuana establishments, whether recreational or adult use, there's going to be a higher odor threshold, or I suppose lower, depending on how you want to look at that. Make sure that they're all fully enclosed in permanent structures. We've had a couple caregivers in the past have outdoor grows, and we did get a couple odor complaints. And short of shutting them down, they basically finished their harvest and said, I'm not coming back. Good. Made our life a little bit easier than for the next year around. A couple people asked about greenhouses, if that's considered an enclosed structure. It certainly is, from both a zoning and land use code perspective and potentially a building code perspective. It is a structure. I would caution caregivers that if, you know, if they want to use a greenhouse, go for it, but I think the challenge may be controlling odors with that, depending on what kind of building it is and whatnot. So the burden's really going to be on them. Setbacks. Require 1,000-foot setbacks from schools, public parks, playgrounds, recreational facilities owned by the city. We're trying to put some very specific language in there and as to how those setbacks are measured. That's something that we currently contend with now with some provisions in our ordinance, how we measure from bars and adult business establishments. I don't want to necessarily use that language. I think we can be clearer as to how that's actually getting measured. We put some language in here that talks about how you've measured that. That's similar to some other language that other communities are using. I should note, as I say, other communities, I've looked at a handful of communities, including Auburn, to see what they've done. And honestly, I've taken what I think is maybe a good idea and kind of massaged it into this, and then taken some of our own provisions and just made them work as well. So it's kind of a hodgepodge of ideas here. Within that locational criteria there, we wouldn't have any prohibition necessarily that you could have more than one marijuana business located on the same lot, as long as all state and local conditions are met. So if someone had like a strip mall location and they wanted to have more than one location in there, we wouldn't necessarily be opposed to that, assuming they can meet all the other provisions that are in this ordinance. We're making clear what a school is, both private schools there as well, and we're referencing state statute there, so there's hopefully less confusion. One of the things that did take out of that was daycares. If you remember last time, we talked about daycares and nurseries, and you know, really looking at it, both myself, I think the chief and the caregivers, if the council wants to go that route, it's certainly in your purview, but that pretty much shuts the city down from any type of marijuana establishment. We've taken out churches as well. Churches, this is not, a completely accurate statement, but people aren't building, the Vineyard or St. Pat's or the Basilica anymore. They're building storefronts, churches these days. And we get this complaint actually from establishments serving alcohol that all of a sudden they're non-conforming because somebody threw up a storefront church that wasn't there before. Do we want to run into that same situation with any type of marijuana establishment? I would suggest we avoid that and take churches out of the equation, just like we would take child care facilities, specifically daycares and nurseries. I go on to tell you how we are being consistent with other sections of the ordinance with respect to public drinking of alcohol and drug-free school zones. We're talking about 1,000 feet. The caregiver language, the state actually allows the municipality to reduce that down to 500 feet. So if you folks thought for some reason that 1,000 feet was too onerous, you could go to a lesser standard. A lot of the caregivers suggested 750. I believe that's what Auburn may be doing. There was concerns about parks, and I've listed the actual parks in here that apply towards the drinking provisions that you folks have already adopted. I think some people feel as though that, yeah, a park with a playground, that maybe that makes a little bit of sense for any type of marijuana establishment to be set away from that. But when you have a more urban park, maybe like the Frame Plaza or something like that, do the same setbacks apply there? Certainly from my perspective, it's easier just to include all of them because we already have some language in there that speaks to this for other types of different substances. But if the council wants to provide more flexibility, you certainly can. At this point, we're recommending that we just stay with the existing language that applies to both drug-free school zones, drug-free safe zones, and where public drinking of alcohol is prohibited.
One quick comment on that. That list of parks needs to be updated and revised because there are some things that have changed since that list was put together.
I already mentioned daycares, nurseries, religious facilities, as far as that not being a recommendation from staff. Discussion about non-conforming structures, and we talked last time, there was some discussion, I think, at the original meeting about whether or not we should have setbacks from residential uses in residential districts. You folks have probably heard from maybe other rezoning proposals that have come before you that most of our major commercial corridors, Main Street, Sabattis, Lisbon Street, the zoning of them is relatively narrow. It's not very dense. It's only one lot deep, basically. You guys, for example, 420 Main Street, what you guys just talked about, while that isn't necessarily the commercial intensity that you might expect, that's only zoned commercially deep, one lot, and then after that, it's immediately residential, it's immediately residential uses. If the council wants to go in that direction and say that there need to be buffers along all of our commercial corridors, then you will greatly limit the types of establishments that can occupy the community. We're suggesting you don't do that. With that in mind, if you do go that route, we would have non-conforming establishments already. We'd have a bunch of them. The recommendation is to treat non-conforming non-conforming uses, our existing marijuana establishments, that being the retail and the grow operations, treat them just like any other non-conforming use. So they're there, they were legally established at the time, they can continue to operate. I'm a license holder, I closed down for no more than a year to 24 months, and somebody else comes in and wants to operate a marijuana establishment, they can do that. After that year to 24 months, they're out of luck. That's how we treat existing non-conforming uses now. There's a slight exception to that, and I don't know if I mentioned it in here. If you wanted to, you could actually reduce that to a shorter period of time, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be 12 to 24 months. The council many years ago adopted different language for adult business establishments when they were trying to get rid of all the clubs in the red light district down here on Lisbon Street. And basically they said, if you had to be operating 150 50 days in the calendar year, and if you weren't, you could no longer be reestablished. So certainly there's flexibility there as to how long a non-conforming use can remain abandoned, but I would suggest that you folks consider anybody that's already out there, if the changes that you adopt make them non-conforming because they're close to a park or they're close to a residential use or something like that, I would suggest that you continue to allow them. That's historically what we do with zoning and land uses. Minimum distance between, the last bullet on page 4, minimum distance between marijuana store and any other dispensary shall be 500 feet. Again, there was some thought about that, so you didn't necessarily have a cluster of these establishments in one location. That said, if you're in a strip mall and you're 500 feet away from another establishment there, we're recommending that would be fine.
Wasn't a previous bullet point that businesses could be co-located, though?
Yes.
It's not in contradiction?
It may be. There is the language about co-location, because the state allows co-location to a certain degree. I can tell you
Maybe I'm
this.
jumping ahead.
You might be.
I did my homework.
Let me come back to that. I might have an answer for you. I can tell you from a state's perspective, co-location of, as it stands right now anyway, if you wanted to do adult use and medical marijuana, they have to be separate, like separate storefronts. So it could be the same exact building, and they just need to have 2 doors. So one, this room is the adult use and the hallway is recreational. As long as I go outside and go back in, you can have those 2 establishments there. In other words, you can't sell adult use and medical marijuana in the same storefront. Yeah, you're right, Councilor Ray. The next bullet talks about that as far as being co-located and operated in the same building there. So the thought there is that's a store and/or cultivation or manufacturing and testing. So I could have a store and I'm growing, or I have a store and I'm testing. It's not necessarily that you have a store and I have a store, 2 separate license holders, so to speak. It's you as the license holder are doing both the testing and the cultivation and the manufacturing.
So it's co-located uses.
Right, yeah. Drive-through and home delivery, allow that. We had some concerns about adult use. Caregivers said that they would like to see adult use be allowed for deliveries as well. My thought at this point is the state hasn't even figured that out yet. So if we're going to act upon that, we can always revisit that later on. But this time it wouldn't be allowed. It'd only be allowed for medical marijuana only. Security, there's not a lot of changes here, given what our current provisions are, making sure that you have adequate security systems in there, locks, lighting, that type of thing. Nothing that these folks really aren't doing as it is now. A number of communities have been talking about signs, and this is actually, I've taken language from a couple communities on this, where they're talking about some sign limitations. Particularly, there's language in here that talks about marijuana plants or parts thereof don't exceed 20% of the sign face, and that everyone is supposed to display a 1-by-1 image of the universally recognized marijuana symbol, which apparently is the green cross. So I don't know why that's necessary yet, but in any event, if you folks are worried about the amount of marijuana represented on these images, we can throw that in our sign ordinance. It says, great, it can't be any more than 20% towards that pictorial image of what the product is that they're selling there. We already talked about nonconformance, so I apologize, I jumped ahead on that section there, but that was the nonconformance section that we were talking about. Automatically disqualifying the applicant for a license. This is an issue that Chief O'Malley can speak to if he has other concerns, but we indicated felony conviction within the last 10 years, misdemeanor convictions, knowingly submitting false information, failure to demonstrate adequate premise liability, failure to meet other requirements of the state, and tax delinquency. I would say the majority of them, of the caregivers we met with, felt that was reasonable. specific requirements on who's operating these establishments. That's kind of come up recently where a lot of these folks, they want to switch names or have LLCs and whatnot. Kind of similar to the rental registration discussions we've been having, right? We want to know who are these people, who's actually selling the product and whatnot. So if you're part of an LLC, who are the agents, who are the contacts and whatnot? So just making sure that's specific, both in the ordinance and when the application is generated. Fee structure, we currently charge $550. I think I mentioned last time, the initial inspections of these involves a fair amount of time in the sense that we're involving various departments, planning, code, police, fire, the electrical inspector. What we haven't been good at is doing re-inspections of these facilities. Anybody in this room that's been licensed for multiple years has probably only seen us once. And really, we should be doing annual inspections of these facilities. I think if you ask the police department, they would say, well, we don't really do inspections like that. This is like a new rule, a new expectation of their department there. So with that in mind, we were thinking that we would need to adjust our fees to, keep them justifiable to the additional duties that departments are taking on here. You can see the fees listed throughout here for different use groups. I would say they're compatible with what other communities have been doing. I can tell you that the marijuana store right now in Auburn, as it's listed, is actually $5,000 versus $1,500, and that's great. If they want to go that route, that's fine. So I think, if you folks want to move these numbers around, you probably can, but we have to remain cognizant that they have to be justifiable. We can't just price people out of the community, per se. Exemptions, so things that I don't want to know about, that probably police doesn't want to know about, that we just don't want to deal with. You're growing it for yourself, have at it. Just keep the odor under control. If we get an odor complaint, we're going to respond. But if you're growing legally as a caregiver or an adult use, then you're all set. Caregivers manufacturing out of their residence, they could do that as a home occupation as long as they meet provisions here. So the trick with that is going to be, and we have to figure this out. Right now, if someone wants to do home processing, well, let me back up. You're a home processor and you make whoopie pies at home. Great, you get a use permit from planning and code enforcement, you get a license from the clerk's office, life is good. Now you want to make, infuse those with marijuana, what are the requirements are going to be with that? We're going to suggest that you should be allowed to do that, but you still have to be licensed with the community. But if you're going to do any type of manufacturing, and that's where, honestly, I still got to figure that out, because I think state definition may define manufacturing as doing some type of home processing. And if that's the case, I'm not sure that we necessarily want to allow that. I can tell you we have some home processors in the community now that are doing this that we don't even know about. I mean, they call me up and all of a sudden they're incriminating themselves saying, hey, I'm doing this at home. Geez, you probably shouldn't be doing that at home. So I do need to come back to you with that, folks, and probably get some guidance from you, and I'll come back with a better recommendation. But the question is going to be, if someone is doing home processing at home, at a minimum, we should probably be licensing that so we know about it. But do we care? Is that something we want to get involved with? So that's it. What's going to end up happening here is I'm looking for some direction from you folks. And if it's looking good, what we're going to end up having to do is amend several sections of ordinance, both to the Code of Ordinances, where a lot of this lies now. It's going to involve planning board involvement for the zoning and land use changes. At some point, you folks will be asked to initiate an amendment for both let me back up. You'll have to have an amendment and a hearing for the Code of Ordinance changes, but then you also need to initiate an amendment for the zoning and land use, so the planning board can consider that. And Ed and I haven't really talked about how we're going to do that, first reading and then initiate or whatnot, but I didn't want to put this in text format, ordinance format yet, because if you folks have some heartburn or something, I didn't want to go too far in one direction.
Questions for Dave? Councilor Ray.
Thanks. Sorry, they're written everywhere. So the first question is, in trying to understand how we would be licensing the business, is that correct? For recreational use?
Yes.
Not the person.
Well, it's the operator of that, so it could be, if it's the individual, if it's an LLC, some type of proprietorship, we're gonna
And
be
anyone
licensed.
who works in that business could then sell.
They could, but then they would have to get another license, just like if,
The individual, correct?
right, yeah.
Okay.
So if we have a pizza establishment in town, and it's under your name, and you decide to sell it to me, you have to get a new license for that, because it's still the same pizza place, but now it's run by David instead of Alicia, you have to get a new license for that. Same thing would apply here.
That's not the question I'm asking. I'm asking if
So
I-
say, yeah,
I
say,
own a business and Kristen is my employee, Mayor Cloutier, sorry. Can the mayor sell on my behalf?
can Kristen, so,
I believe you can under the new rules for medical marijuana. I don't know how
Like
that works for adult
recreation.
use. I don't know.
Okay, I think that should be provided for and understood in here.
is that a state question, Dave, though?
It is a state question. Like previously, you couldn't,
I think all of the folks that work at the dispensaries have to have an individual license. Correct,
Yeah.
David?
For medical?
right, I don't know
Yep.
about adult use though. I'm guessing somebody in the audience probably has the answer to this question. But they recently changed the medical rules, so you could do that, so you could actually have, it used to be that everybody in there had to be a caregiver. Now you can have a designated employee as well sell the marijuana. As far as adult use, I'm not sure.
That may come down to what the state decides in their regulations.
Okay, cool. In terms of drive-through and delivery, I think it's wise to keep drive-through off of Lewiston's rolls, but I would advocate for allowing delivery for both. I don't think we particularly want folks to go purchase, use, and then drive themselves home, so bring it to them, defeat that. And then I'd be in favor of reducing the setback from 1,000 to 750 feet. Let me see if there's anything else. And it seems like none of this provides for use of marijuana. So I'd be really curious to hear from the chief at some point about if there's rules from the state on that.
For what?
For use of marijuana once you purchase it.
For use or youth?
Use.
Not youth.
Well, we had a discussion with the majority of these people here in terms of who could get the license. You know, and I think when you talked about drive-through, I saw heads nodding. I know that they want to do the delivery, but none of these places, I mean, none of them are going to have on-site consumption. So I don't think that'd be an issue in terms of them going into any of these establishments and, you
And
know,
the state,
using it
the
there.
state prohibits in public too, right?
Right, they do. I
Okay.
mean, it's a civil, or it's a civil violation if someone's smoking, you know, or using marijuana in public.
And
But that may change with the rules. I'm not sure what the state's going to do with that. That may change.
would it also be a violation to consume at any of these businesses?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's not allowed. And they all know that. That's not allowed.
Sure they do, I
Yeah.
don't. Thank you.
Yeah.
Counselor Lyson?
Yep, thank you. I agree with the 750. I think that's a good compromise. And the drive-through, I think we can visit later. And one of my questions is, will we be seeing this before the state rules are promulgated fully for our action?
The way things are going, probably.
Yes, he will.
Okay, and the deliveries, I agree also that you know, if we do allow it, it could be for both.
Is that what you were saying, Councilor Ray? That would be
Yeah.
for both? Okay.
I just think it's perfect.
And the non-conforming use criteria, I mean, I like the 150 days in the prior 12-month period of time, so that it is really still functioning. And I sort of see this as an adult business as well. We call it adult use, why not adult business? And the fees, I think that logic prevails there. I mean, I think we need to be consistent, but not always necessarily, and I think we have to keep those reasonable. Thanks for your work on this. This isn't easy stuff. This is pretty complicated, and the state's not providing a lot of leadership either, so, thank you.
So I'm going to jump in and I agree with most everything that my two predecessors said. I don't agree with the delivery piece. I think that, for me, there are parts of this, while we're trying to do, I think, adult use and medical together, there are pieces of this that don't necessarily fit together, and I think that when we think about pharmacy, medical marijuana to me relates to pharmacies, and pharmacies make deliveries, and so I'm fine with that. When I think about adult use, I think about that more in relation to alcohol, and we don't allow alcohol to be delivered. So that's sort of a discrepancy on my part, so I would not go along with that. I think we hold off on delivery. I'm good with the setbacks. What am I missing, Dave? I think we hold off on the drive-throughs.
Yeah, one of the suggestions I'd probably make, in addition to any feedback you have tonight, is after we've heard from people and everything, look back over this list and just let us know anything that you either have an opinion on or that you would like to have more discussion or more information about, so we can kind of make a list of items that need clarification, or that we can maybe come back with a draft that has several alternative options that you can pick from.
Is the council generally all set, or at least let me know if I should be thinking about something differently, maybe to Ed's point, as far as setbacks from, excuse me, residential uses or residential zoning districts?
Can you explain that in a little bit more depth?
Let me.
Show the map, Dave.
Yeah, exactly. So let's. Yeah, that's not great, but let's pretend for a second, right? Great. Did you see the hand? Okay, so the hand is the zoning line today, right? And everything behind this line where my hand is now is residential. So this is Lisbon Street. This is, let me go this way a little bit more. So this is, what's the school on Lisbon Street? Longley. Martel, excuse me, not Longley, Martel. So Martel, so this is Lisbon Street, East Avenue is running this way right here. My hand's on the Lewiston Mall. Everything you see outside of this, right, is residential. So you have these commercial corridors here where if there's gonna be, and we know that there's commercial uses within these purple areas as well, right? So if you wanna put any type of medical or adult use in that area, does the council want to see it have a setback from that use? 300 feet, 1,000 feet, whatever number you want. We're recommending that there shouldn't be a setback. Same goes when you're outside of these purple lines, right? Because you're in a residential zone immediately. So you can envision Lisbon Street running down the middle of this corridor, kind of where I'm moving the hand here, and the depth of that district is probably anywhere from 100 to 200 feet either side, and then it's residential again. So that greatly limits it. I mean, if you folks are interested in putting limitations as to where these uses can go, until you get into maybe like outer Sabata Street or outer Lisbon Street, where there are fewer residential uses immediately abutting, if you're looking at anything from like Exit 80 in, or maybe Stetson Road, or most of Sabata Street, probably from like Pond Road all the way in, it's probably going to be off limits if you're going to have buffers from residential uses, because there are so many residential uses already in those commercial zoning districts. That's a great example of non-conforming. When you folks see a residential use, probably on Sabata Street, it's probably, or Lisbon Street, that would be most likely a non-conforming use. You see a house there, the zoning doesn't allow for that house there anymore. It's great, it's there forever and a day until it's abandoned for over 24 months, and then technically it can't be used as a residential use anymore. So that's an example of a non-conforming use to put in perspective with marijuana uses. We're not recommending buffer, but that would be a good one to have some direction on.
The one last thing that I just wanted to say is, as we're looking at fees, the fee structure, I think it's really important for us to make sure that we are covering our costs with those fees, because it's very unclear right now whether there's going to be any revenue sharing from the state in terms of the tax that they're collecting. Some of us are really pushing for that share, and there are folks who aren't. And so, you know, as you said, we have some significant expenses that are gonna go along with this, and we should make sure that we're covering our bases there. Counselor Pettingill and then Counselor Marcotte.
So I do have some concerns with the not recommendations for daycares, nurseries, and religious facilities. When you talk about daycares, what was the criteria established for that? Was it based on size of the operation or just a la carte?
Regardless, as long as it's a
daycare?
licensed daycare facility, there would have been a buffer.
But it is licensed though?
Yes.
Okay, because
Yep.
there's a big distinction there, but.
It's not a daycare in our eyes if it's not licensed.
Just from the state perspective, not anything with you guys. I have concerns with that. Most home daycares should be set, because I imagine they're gonna be in residential areas. I don't know many nurseries in operation in the city. Daycares and marijuana operations typically look to lease the same type of spaces because they're open concept. There's lots of stories of daycares actually getting kicked out of leases in favor of marijuana operations because they're more lucrative for the landlord. And then with religious facilities, I understand the point between storefront churches as opposed to the basilicas and things of that nature. But I'd hate to see marijuana operations encroach around the basilica, so I don't know if there's a way maybe to identify religious structures to protect sort of the significance of them within the city as opposed to just, you know, religious facilities, period. You know, I'm also not in favor of delivery, you know, because again, you can't verify the end user with that. I did get a chuckle though with the comment of price people out of the community. I haven't seen much of that methodology be applied to much in my term up here. But I do agree with the mayor that regardless of the cost, we do need to make sure that we cover our cost in this. You know, again, I'm not in favor of this moving forward. I know that we're past that point, so we'll see where the chips fall.
Just for clarification, when you were speaking to daycares, so you're talking, I would tend to agree with you that probably family daycares shouldn't be an issue because they're likely in a residential zoning district to begin with, so you're not gonna have any type of commercial operation. If it's, so that would then leave it to like small daycare facilities and regular daycare facilities. You're suggesting that there should be buffers from those?
I would like to see that. I know Lever's Daycare on Mollison Way, it's pretty typical to be out in that stretch of Main Street, and there's a very strong odor of marijuana on a daily basis out that way. It's real strong by the ice cream store out there. I'm sure that that's outside the setback, but, you know, we identify areas that children frequent as an idea to protect, and I think that that's the right way to approach this.
Thank you.
Counselor Marcotte.
I think Councilor Pettingill said it a whole lot better than I could. Touched on a whole lot more items than I was looking at. I was just going to point out daycares and nurseries would be a deal breaker for me if there was no setbacks. And I would prefer to have some sort of setback for residential. And it could be a lot smaller number than it currently is, or currently suggested. Yeah, that's where I was going with it.
Anyone else on the council?
Some of the issue with residential might be how it's measured, Dave, right?
It could be. I mean, we can talk about that as far as how we want to measure that. Is it from the property line? Is it from the main entrance of the establishment to the property line of the residential use? You could have a large warehouse-type structure immediately abutting a residential use behind you, and there's no activity to the rear of it, but you have to walk all the way around. Is that how we want to measure it, or do we want to measure it from the closest point of that building to, you know, the closest point of the property line? And we can give that some thought, but it makes a big difference potentially as how you're measuring that. And I would suggest, and again, we can come back to you with options. If the council is leaning towards buffers from residential uses, I would say it would be residential uses, or I would suggest residential uses in residential districts versus residential uses that are non-conforming, meaning a residential use in a commercial district. If that use isn't, you know, it's there because it's been there 50, 100 years or whatever, but I can put a gas station next to it, I can put a warehouse next to it, why not one of these uses versus the example on the screen, if it's a residential right behind me, if that, and they're in an appropriate zone, you know, there's a reason there, then maybe there should be a buffer there. That would be, I don't know if a compromise, but that would seem to make more sense just from a zoning perspective. Something to consider.
Counselor Ray?
Could you remind us what the difference is between a daycare and what'd you call it last
Nursery.
time? Child nursery?
Yeah, right. I was like, what am I? Well, I'm just making up
Human
words, right?
nursery?
So, funny you should ask. We don't have a definition for nurseries.
You looked it up? Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. And that's actually going to be something coming before you because we have somebody who's actually interested in operating a nursery, and we're making their life difficult, saying you can't do that. The zone doesn't allow for nurseries. We haven't contemplated that. So we're actually going to be coming forward with a specific definition for nurseries.
Child nursery?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, child
It's very
nursery.
confusing.
Yes.
So we don't have a definition between the two yet?
That's correct. Right now, we treat nurseries as educational facilities. I know there are operators in the community that would like to see a distinction made between the two, where a nursery is more...
Nursery school, is that
Yes.
what? Okay.
A nursery school being more in line with a daycare facility than, you know, a middle school or an elementary school or a private school, something like that.
But wouldn't a nursery, if it's being treated as an educational facility, fall under school from
It would today, absolutely.
Title 28, Section 1?
That's right. No, actually, when you look under that definition, excuse me, the state doesn't include nursery. We would, from a local zoning and land use perspective. But from a state definition perspective, nursery doesn't fall into that.
It wouldn't fall under any other educational facility that serves children from pre-K?
I'm quite certain.
Okay. Weird. Thanks.
Other questions on the council? All right, we'll open it up to the public. Just a reminder that you need to state your name and your address, and everyone gets 3 minutes, and there's a timer on the screen, so if you could pay attention to your time, that'd be great. Thank you.
Ronnie Parity, 82 Prospect Avenue, Lewiston, Maine. I'd just like to recommend to the council to get the Lewiston Public Health Committee involved with this. I purposely have been studying cannabis the past few months because of all this. As a nurse, I had a different opinion of cannabis compared to what I've learned about the plant itself, and especially from a medical viewpoint. And I think that's very important as you make decisions, that you also understand the medical part versus the recreational part of the plant. And just to tell you that many of our medications today are from plants. Digitalis, aspirin is from the willow tree. So again, you have to think about this as from the medical viewpoint. And the seniors, many of the seniors I've talked to are now using cannabis for medical treatments. And it's really been very helpful for many, many people. So I know the adult use compared to the medical is a lot different, and I agree. But I think that you could use the Public Health Committee's advisement on some of this too, because we have Aaron, who's Healthy Androscoggin, and all the other stuff that we're doing research on. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Step right up. Going once.
Hi, I'm Kerry Landry. I live on 83 Gayton Road in Lewiston. Became a part of a storefront because I got to know the community of people who were involved with it. There's a lot of local business people involved in different aspects or respects to cannabis that I don't think we really thought we'd get into storefronts at any one time. But this is a golden opportunity to supply people with an avenue, with a venue. There's a growing community of users, patients, who have a safe place to go for a healthy, clean product. We're very excited about that. The offer for delivery service would be good. I can see it down the road, but it's how the state feels about it as well. I think having something in place beforehand, whether it's photographing IDs. Right now, we currently, part of our process in the store is to always have an ID, state ID, and a med card, and we photocopy it. And so we have documentation at all times. That's part of the process that the state's asked us to do. We more than happily accommodated that because we understand those are the rules of the moment. That's what's needed on a medical level. Adult use will be a little bit different. We're not quite sure what to expect out of that direction either. And we could see reservations with that. How aggressive do we want to allow more stores into the community? I think there's going to be a movement, or new stores, I should say, because we do have a lot right now. There are probably more than there need to be for the community. But given the opportunity to start our own business, to perhaps have a life where we can, be employed and employing others. Over at Cincinnati right now, there are 10 employees between grow and store. And for 8 of us, it's a full-time. It's our livelihood. It's our occupation. I know at Medco, they probably have a good deal of people, right around 10, give or take more. And the same with Cure Cannabis, and on with the others. It's an opportunity for us to have, right now, it seems like it's all very new, and we're still trying to figure out the guidelines and the rules also. But we've always been in touch with the state, different developments, and we'd be more than happy to be transparent with you guys as well. Invite you to one of our stores, or at least share some video or documentation about what goes on from our patient relationships, from our neighbor relationships. We're close with Guthrie's over there. I don't think they've had a problem with us being there. In fact, it's been a great neighborhood feel, even though we're off the beaten path. I'm sure that the same could be said on other levels. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Leo Cormier. I live at 120 Riverside in Auburn. First, I want to thank the council for the time to actually be involved in this process. I think it's great that we've been able to have our voices heard, and you guys have been very engaged. I just wanted to speak on behalf of a couple of the other stores, Medco and Cincinnati, as well as our store, Cure Cannabis, has gotten together to start an alliance to educate the community on some social responsibility of cannabis. Really, we want to come and start solving some of the problems that this new policies and procedures with cannabis have created. In our last meeting, a lot of the things that Chief O'Malley stood out to me. Frankly, the fact that the chief of police doesn't want to respond for THC toxicity and doesn't want the town to smell like marijuana, it's probably time that we need to start meeting them, where they are. I have some meetings with Healthy Androscoggin with addiction services set up later in the week. I do plan on speaking with members of the school board and other people in the community and just find out how this has been affecting and how we can use our resources together to help, again, start solving some of these problems. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Mayor Cloutier and council members, my name is Alex McMahon. I live at 40 Lisbon Street. I work at the Healing Community Medco and am a member of the association that Leo just mentioned. That's an association we formed as a means for having easier dialogue with the city and with our community. First off, I want to thank you for hosting this workshop and giving us the chance to speak as well. So far, the city has shown willingness to work with caregivers in the crafting of the new rules. We are appreciative of that. We are all a part of an evolving industry here in Lewiston, and all of us on both sides of the room want to be sure that the rulemaking plays out in a way that is best for the community. As everyone is now aware, there are several storefronts that have opened up in Lewiston within the past year, and I believe so far we have demonstrated a willingness to work with the city and the ability to run our businesses in a professional manner. That not only fits in well with the community, but fits in with the current local business climate. The majority of the new storefronts are operating transparently and within compliance and with a modern upscale approach. I do invite you to come into any of the storefronts. I invite you to come into Medco or Sensimilla or Cure Cannabis Co. or Treeline and see our atmosphere and how we do business. And form your own opinions on the professionalism and integrity of our operations. As we prepare for the state's shift into the adult use market, I believe I speak for all of the medical storefronts when I say we would like to be considered for adult use licensing and for our legally non-conforming status to be carried over into the adult use market. We all wish to continue serving the community, the cancer patients and veterans, those suffering from chronic pain and depression, anxiety, and other ailments that lead to lower quality of life. And the only way we can continue to serve these members of our community is if we are allowed to remain relevant by being granted adult use licensing. The zoning requirements as they are written now would be restrictive to most, if not all, of the existing medical storefronts. The changes that Mr. Hediger mentioned are appreciated. The religious facilities and daycare facilities and child nurseries that we saw on a map at the last work session actually limit most, if not all, of the city. The 1,000-foot setback between schools, that is completely understandable. That I don't believe any of the stores are currently within 1,000 feet of a school. Also, the concern that people will provide cannabis to high schoolers or middle schoolers is far more valid than the concern that people will provide cannabis to children in daycares and nurseries. We believe our customers are more responsible than that. We can consider reworking the zoning recommendations, or we could consider granting adult use licensing to the existing legally non-conforming medical storefronts and cultivation facilities. This would allow the opportunity for success for those who have already demonstrated accountability, and if the city is concerned about oversaturation of the cannabis market, the city could put a license cap or keep the zoning recommendations how they're written now for any future cannabis businesses. Again, we welcome you to come visit our establishments and make your own assessments as to whether or not you believe we fit into the community. I believe you will be pleased with what you see. We hope you will take our suggestions into consideration, and we look forward to working with the City of Lewiston to continue helping our city grow. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi, my name's Tom Harrison. I actually have a caregiver operation on 239 Bartlett. Now, most of my concern is the 1,000-foot. The school that I am most close with owns a lot of land. Now, if you were to go by the property line, that covers a giant area, when, in fact, I'm probably a quarter mile from the school in a bird's eye, or a bird's flight. So it makes me non-conforming, and I believe it would be better fitted to actually measure from building to building rather than line because of the acreage they own, and that some places may own. As far as churches, I'm also right next door to a church, and I've had no problem. Actually, the only problems I've had is they'll sometimes park in my parking area and ding up a car of mine or something of the sort. And on the non-conforming space that I'm at, also I needed Mr. Hediger to be maybe more specific about this, would be I'm required to be open certain hours as a grow for my patients to come. Now, to just make it a more sanitary operation, to keep up with standards that are every day, you know, where you have to raise the bar every day, basically cleaner, better product, everything. Now, I wouldn't want my patients to enter my area, like you wouldn't pick up your prescription medication at the facility that manufactures it. Now, since I'm non-conforming and too close to schools and parks, would I not be able to, let's say, build like a office on that property separate from my facility that they could enter like a doctor's office? Because I believe them entering an actual grow facility could contaminate it in some ways. It's actually very easy to do, and that would be something I would like to avoid, as well as every other grower. A couple other things. I invite the annual checks just to rid the suspicion that any of us are doing anything wrong. That alone is great for me. So anytime, let's say they would come to my tenants for his renewal, I would invite them immediately to come into mine, just to check it out, lay eyes on it. It keeps everybody at ease, thinking that nothing illegal is happening, everybody's following the law, going by the book. Also, on the pricing on licensing, I guess I would ask what you guys see as your expenses being, because I wouldn't like to see it raised to, let's say, $5,000. That's, our expenses are already incredibly high to just operate in general. And I don't see you guys having that kind of money invested into a yearly check or some paperwork on us. And I also agree with the mayor on the deliveries for medical. I know a lot of older gentlemen, my family, my father, they really take advantage of CBD and other small things where he's 76 years old. He doesn't get around as good as I do, or someone on the recreational side does, which they can walk into any store and get it. So I do agree recreational, we don't need deliveries, but medical, I feel that we shouldn't go away with it. That's all I have. Thank you.
Yeah, go right up to the...
Hi, my name is Ryan Richards. I'm located on North Hatch Hill in Greene. I'm also the owner of Sensimia. I just want to say that I'm part of a group called MCIA out of Portland that works direct conjunction with Eric Gunderson, who is writing the state laws. So what I'm saying to you folks is, as you know, speaking on behalf of the store owners or whatever, we're welcome to work with each other. You know, I know there's a lot of things that are still being, you know, brought out that we're understanding of, but we want to share with you. I'm sure all of you haven't read the laws from front to back, nor have a lot of us in here. And we just want to say that we want to work with you as a group to help alleviate any concern or help this move forward. Because the timeline, what we see going with the state is everything will be rolled out by, I'd say, fall. Probably, you know, the winter, the latest, as far as seed to sale tracking's coming, as far as the adult use program coming. I mean, the state wants to start collecting these tax revenues, as you folks do as well. So whatever we can do to help that situation is we're here for. So we would be more than welcome to work together with you folks to do so. Thank you.
You can step right up.
Hi, my name is Dennis Terrio. Live at 245 Bartlett Street. I own the property that Mr. Harrison just explained that he leases from me. I guess I just want to state something that Ronnie Parody was saying, that my philosophy has changed a great deal in regards to the use of cannabis, in regards to elderly people and people in need that can't find it in the pharmaceutical end. there have been some great changes, let's put it this way. I purchased the first canine dog for the city of Lewiston because I believe I wanted a deterrent all the time. My philosophy has changed greatly in regards to how it helps certain people with MS, that sort of thing. I have friends like that. You might be very surprised, people that sit on boards in this city that actually take advantage of cannabis and helps them. I guess having sat on the planning board for 5 years at one time, one of the key things when we do performance standards and whatever, trying to identify what the threat is. What is the threat of this product versus a threat of opioids or whatever at a pharmacy? Because what I'm seeing is a different set of standards being used for this than a pharmacy which has ready to use, take off the shelf and use. Cannabis basically takes quite a bit of time to grow, get to a performance use stage and that sort of thing. And someone would have to have a great deal of detail of what's going on in that building before they actually break in and take that for use. Part of what I want to set up here is and Dave and I have discussed this at one time, is the distance standard. The distance standard from what we had discussed at one time was a direct line of sight. Now, Mr. Lyson, correct me if I'm wrong, but basically in development, we've looked at that as going down a sidewalk, turning a street, going to the front door of an establishment, and not necessarily a direct line of sight. Correct me if I'm wrong on that kind of line of thinking, because in normal development, it's going down the street, not going over someone else's property to achieve access to that property. And I guess I just want to make a comment on that. Distance from an item has never deterred a person willing to break into an establishment. You could establish 3,000 feet, 10,000 feet. If they're determined to break into that establishment, they're going to do it. Locks, whatever, it's not going to hold them back. Cameras, that sort of thing. Police are doing an excellent job. Fire department has. I've had his establishment in for about 2 years now. Never an issue, never an attempted break-in. No people loitering on our property, no odor issues that we've heard of or anything else. So I guess the distance thing, Dave, is it doesn't seem to meet up with the other standards of usage for provisional procedural standards that we use for development. This seems to be different. We've already addressing the odor standards, which I can understand, property line, that sort of thing. But if we're getting into a larger distance, I'm still hung up on what is the threat. What is the threat different than a pharmacy, different than a microbrewery producing 10,000 gallons, which gets a little bit into the production end of the fee schedule that you have. And the fee schedule, and I understand there are costs to the city. I'm sitting on other boards that actually review that, and I understand that. How are we doing the same type of review for pharmacies, microbreweries, that sort of thing, which also, as you indicated, have social impacts? So I guess my thing is you got to be balanced, and I do want to make sure that people from fire, police, all get paid adequately for what they review and what they come in and take a look at. And to finalize that, on page 6, disqualification of local licensing and that sort of thing. And from a leaseholder's point, from a property owner when I'm leasing out, it says, I think it's the 4th or 5th one down, failure to demonstrate the ability to maintain adequate premises liability and casualty insurance. What is adequate? That hasn't been identified. That can be determined by anything and every one. I know I have liability insurance on my properties. I'm interested from a person that owns the property on what I should be conveying to a leaseholder, and what is this from a property owner's perspective, or is this from the person leasing from me? The other thing too, I said, I just put explain.
Sorry, I just want to, you're over time, so if you can just wrap it up, that would be
Sure. Tax delinquency issues at local, state, or federal level. What would that involve? Is if a person had multiple LLCs in a city, was delinquent for a month or something, does that, because it's under that person's name, does that follow through as far as a delinquency in tax?
We've recently had some discussions with our attorneys about that, and I believe it's on an individual entity-by-entity basis.
Okay. Because obviously you're focused on the individual and identifying the individual as running that entity, so that's why I was going there in that.
Well, yes, we'd be mostly interested in the legal entity.
And
that may be a sole proprietorship,
And they not paying their
LLC.
fees and taxes, state,
Correct.
local, whatever, in regards to that establishment. Fine, thank you very much for your
Thank
time.
you.
My name is Joseph Johnson. I live at 40 Lewiston Street. I just wanted to touch on the home delivery one more time. Currently, adult use delivery is prohibited by the state. However, there is a bill in the State House sponsored by Representative Jim Handy that would potentially allow adult use delivery in an effort to increase public safety and reduce the black market. If the state does decide to allow home delivery and Lewiston has prohibited it, other municipalities will profit from Lewiston citizens, and Lewiston businesses will miss out on revenue from delivering to the rest of the state. If home delivery remains prohibited, it will be a moot point. But if it is allowed in the future, Lewiston will be disadvantaged to other cities that have not included it in their ordinances, such as Portland, Lisbon, and Manchester. The potential tax revenue of home delivery could be huge. The number of jobs could be created would be substantial. Not to mention the increased public safety created by reducing the number of drivers on the road with cannabis. On this topic, we would prefer if Lewiston take direction from the state.
So I also just want to point out on that point that the state would have to agree to share those tax revenues with the municipalities, and they've not agreed to do that yet, so. Yes.
Hi, I'm Linda Scott. I live at 45 Pettingill Street. And I'm just going to comment I hadn't planned on speaking, but I'm just going to comment as a resident of Lewiston. And I would like to say that just listening to these business owners and what they have agreed to do and to work with the city and what they are bringing to our community as far as new business, revenue, help to people that need it, I applaud every one of you for what you have done, what you have said, and how you have been working with the community. I think this is something that we need to look at as a very good thing and not a negative thing. I know some people have a lot of issues around the subject of cannabis and smoking marijuana, but we also have to recognize that this is something that is happening. It's not just happening in our state, but it's happening across the country. And we are always looking for new business in our community. It's right here. Thank you.
Anyone else? Going once? Going twice? All right. That concludes our workshop on that agenda item. Do you have what you need, Dave?
I'm good, thank you. I will be back, as I suggested, and, yeah. One bit of levity for you folks, and Mr. Marcotte brought this to my attention. But you'll note that we talked about 420 Main Street tonight.
Yes.
We talked about marijuana.
It was not lost on Councilor Ray.
And the fines
I feel
under...
like this is you, Ed.
And the fines under solid waste also equal $420, so.
Yes, it's you. I know it is.
That's right.
Thank you.
I'm going to have to ask Dave to explain that to me. I don't know what he's talking about.
Sure. I don't know how helpful it doesn't have,
That language, Michael LaJoy.
all it has is schools on it.
Those chairs are very uncomfortable.